Hi, our guest today is Christopher Wilson. Chris is one of the candidates running for school committee in the April 3rd Milford annual town election. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome. Thank you for having me on your show.
So the first and most obvious question is, why are you running for school committee?
So I am running for school committee because first and foremost, I'm a parent of 2 children within the school system. So my son Ryan is an 8th grader and my daughter Kaylee is a 6th grader. So it's important to me to be a part of their education process, and I've always have been. Plus, certainly know a lot of different people around Milford that have school-age children. So I feel it's important for me to represent them and their children in the best interest of all the children within the Milford school community.
Are there any particular things you have in mind to do or push forward if you get elected?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the level 3 status at Milford High School is of great concern to me. You know, to be operating in the bottom 20th percentile from the school, that school system or that school itself is of concern, especially when my son's in the 8th grade. So we'll be transitioning up to Milford High School next year. Yep. My daughter in 6th grade will certainly be going up there in the next few years. So it's important to understand what the problems are and the issues of that school and try to rectify it and bring it up, you know, from 3 to 2 to 1. And certainly you know, the social emotional needs that are more becoming a front page issue within every community within the United States is certainly something that needs to be addressed. Lucy Jenkins is already set up to have a director for that, so it's certainly to keep an eye on that program and ensure that it's in the you know, the best interest of the taxpayers of Milford. Also, the Milford High School is certainly the next on the list of school renovation. So, you know, to make sure that we are looking ahead of that program, what's going to happen from a renovation standpoint and what's going to be needed for the Milford taxpayer.
Okay.
Do you think that there is a need to have the school renovated?
Certainly. You know, obviously age is one thing, but when you look at...
What is it, early 70s or late 60s?
It was, yeah, early 70s from what I understand. And you look at what they've done with Woodland School and the learning environment and the various rooms that they have to benefit the teachers from far as a pull-out scenario where they can help individualize teaching different children when warranted. So you have your general ed classroom, you have your pull-out service classrooms, things of that nature. And certainly, you know, it's nice to be within a building that is new and fresh and clean. And certainly, more and more, as we're in the computer age, we need that digital infrastructure to be able to, you know, teach our children.
I was going to say, a hard building, the way it's constructed out of concrete panels, a hard building to renovate.
Certainly.
Personally, I'd wish they kept the middle school east building. You could have done it wing by wing, take House A, move it down to Middle East, renovate that, swap them up, take B, put it down, move it back up, then get rid of it. But that's not a possibility anymore. So.
No, certainly not. But I would think that, you know, as we look at comprehensive plans on how to renovate Milford High School, I'm sure we can, certainly we'll be taking all that into consideration as far as scheduling. I mean,
the cost of building a new one is prohibitive, and then what do you do with the old one?
Certainly. And real estate amongst Milford
is...
There's
2 things. First,
well, land.
Land, number one, if you were to build a new one.
Yeah.
Where
but I mean, given the pricing you're at for school buildings today, and looking at, you know, places like Newton that have just built one, and other places, for size, Milford size, I would hazard a guess you're talking between 150 and 220 million if you were to, not including buying the land and building a new one. And then what do you do with the old one?
Right.
You know, that has to get taken apart, and you know, and then it's not like Woodland where you had room enough to build a new one, you know, then tear the old one down and you know, turn it into a playing field. That's so obviously renovating the existing one might be preferable.
Would be in the best interest, certainly.
Yeah.
Not easily done, because renovation, architectural costs and
Cost more.
construction cost significantly, usually about twice as much, because when you're building new, you know, you're starting with something clean.
Right, it's a clean slate.
When you're renovating, you don't know what's behind the wall. So you always find surprises. We went through that at the middle school in Mendon.
Oh, you go through that in any building.
Anytime you renovate something, when you tear the wall down, it's
I
surprise
told
city.
people, we went through that in the library in Mendon where we found renovating an old church into a library, found out the back wall wasn't attached to either the roof
Right,
or the
no,
sides.
that's a big time. That was a big time.
So for anybody who wants to know, that was an $18,000 of engineer, you're an engineer, $18,000 to have somebody re-engineer that, and $110,000 to execute pinning it all together, just to have a solid building. But the wall was falling down, whole back of the building. Things you don't know till you get into old buildings.
Exactly, that's part of the construction process, certainly.
We were having a conversation before we started taping the show, and you're one of the few people we've interviewed so far. So far, we've had one of the 7 who actually knows the statutory duties of school committee members.
Okay.
So thanks for knowing them. Do you want to talk about, what role you'd play in those?
Yeah, well, certainly, yeah, from a school committee member, from the easiest way to explain what a school committee member is going to do is you're going to oversee policy and set policy, and you're going to oversee the budget and set the budget. So,
and the last one, hire and fire the superintendent.
Yes, certainly you are the superintendent's boss, so it's important for that superintendent to be able to report back to the school committee of what he's currently doing and what his future plans are for the Milford school system. So, again, as we look at, maintaining or improving our status, it's going to be important for the superintendent to be able to lay out a comprehensive plan that he presents to the school committee, that the school committee understands, and that the school committee is certainly on board with.
Now here's another question that came up during the course of interviewing all the candidates. And just so you know, you're the 5th out of 7. You guys certainly can hold the superintendent responsible for whether or not things are executed.
Yes.
Should the public hold the school committee accountable as well?
Of course, we're an elected official. So we were put in that position, that seat, by the Milford voters. So we answer to the Milford voters, or if I'm on school committee, I answer to those Milford voters that I ensured during the campaign process that I would be the best viable candidate for that position. So
And represent those voters.
And represent those voters, and I think fundamentally that's why I have a desire to be a part of the process. Certainly I have my ideas, but I need to be able to listen to the Milford community and be open and understand what their questions and concerns are, and be able to bring that to the table of the Milford School Committee, and also bring it along to the superintendent.
Okay. Now you have kids in the school system. So one is in, you said, what grade, 8th?
So my son's in 8th grade
And
and my
one in
daughter's in
6th.
6th grade. Yes.
So next year they'll be going into the high school.
He will be going to Milford High School, yes.
Question I wanted to ask is, so how do you feel about, as a parent, running for school committee, how do you feel about the experience of getting, one kid through, well, counting kindergarten, that would be 9 grades.
Right. Actually both started at Shining Star Preschool.
Okay. So quite a number of years, let's say 10
Certainly.
to 12 years.
Yes.
How do you feel so far about their experience?
I mean,
good, bad?
I think it's
Needs
good.
improvement?
Yes. I think it's been overall a good process for my children, and like any process, has there been bumps in the road? Sure. Has there been discussions back and forth with their teachers and with principals? Yes. But I believe that it's always been an open line of communication with those teachers and with the administration to be able to talk about the bumps in the road, voice my concerns, hear it from their side, and progress along and making sure that the education process for them has been as smooth as possible. So ultimately, yeah, it has been a good process. My son is on an IEP, so an individualized education plan. So above and beyond the general education side, certainly there's been had to work with a team of individuals and support staff that have helped him along, and he's a good kind of person to look at that had a lot of supports at a younger age, and now in 8th grade he has very few supports. So if you look at him and the success that he has had through the special education department, it's been very successful.
Don't be interrupted, but I was going to say, does he have the few supports because he's gotten to the point that he doesn't need support?
Exactly.
As opposed to,
yeah.
he needs, does, yeah.
Yeah. On an IEP process, you're setting obtainable goals for that student, and you're driving towards those goals. When you achieve those goals, then you look at the next set of goals.
Yeah, well,
and so you keep going in, and once those goals are met, well, now you can drop them off the IEP. So your IEP can, as a document, get smaller and smaller and less support.
All
So-
goals hopefully are attainable.
Yes, exactly. Certainly.
As is, we were talking earlier, I've coached about 30 Boy Scouts to the rank of Eagle, and I always tell them, don't pick a project that you cannot finish.
Right.
It should be attainable.
Yes.
A lot of kids start out and say, well, gee, I heard some kid in the Midwest, sent 10,000 Bibles to the troops overseas. I go, good. Given the size of your troop, given the size of your family and the number of friends you have, can you achieve that?
Right.
If
Yeah.
not, find something smaller to do. So.
Yeah.
Now, you're happy with the way the special ed group has been working for your student, for your
Yes.
son?
For my son, yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So, from my daughter's side, what you'd call it typically developing in the general education process. Again, same with her. She's, has learned a lot. Certainly I like to be a part of their education process and know and understand what they have for homework and certainly follow their grades along. And she's done very well, and certainly seems, like she's learning. And then all her peers too, and the families that you hang out with, your friends' families, they're reporting back to me the same, And again, certainly not without bumps in the roads, but I always encourage anybody that occurs that bump, reach out, communicate. It's so easy to communicate with teachers
as a school
now.
committee member, you're going to get those calls.
Certainly.
You're going to get calls ranging from everything from, I want a different bus schedule, my kid got cut off the team,
Right.
the coach doesn't play my kid on the
I
team.
don't want this teacher, I want that teacher.
Certainly.
You're going to.
Right, and they need to know in a nice way that you're going to refer most of those back to the administration because you really can't fix
That's
them.
not your thing.
Right.
But you can act as an
Certainly.
intermediary to refer it, get an answer, and get back to them saying, now, did they help you?
Exactly, and that's part of the process, and to know and to understand, and being involved in that Milford school system as a parent. Hopefully, a parent that doesn't have as much experience, I can guide them along. It's part of why I'm also on the Milford Special Education Advisory Council. Similar, so we are a council that we try to invite other parents that are new to the special education process, bring them in, have them sit down. We have speakers come in to educate parents, but we're also there just to talk through different situations with those parents and know and understand and try to, guide them through the special
To
education
understand what
process.
an IEP is.
And
Right, yes,
sometimes
yeah.
parents just need to know other people are going through it.
100%.
The other thing I was getting at, when you have a school system with several thousand students, teachers, administrators in it, just the sheer size means that there are, as you say, bumps in the road will be there because you cannot run any large organization
Without some bumps.
100% efficiently. And it means people are human, but it also means they're very responsive if you said those things go through.
I feel they are. Certainly not every teacher and student interaction is going to be perfect. It's no different than at work. Certain people that you interact with and come across, the dynamics, sometimes they just don't work. But
Yeah,
it's a
there's some
good
people at
learning
work
process.
you just can't get along with,
Right.
but you have to.
Right, and I think I try to teach my kids that, and if I ever have a discussion with my friends that there's certain people that it's just you're a difference in opinion. It's so certainly you've got to look for that common ground and try to communicate and work through those differences.
Well, generally speaking, your school committee, as you said, your responsibilities are policy, budget, and hiring and firing the superintendent with a goal of creating an environment where a safe educational environment can be created. So, kind of wrapping it all in.
Speaking of safety, something that's arisen in the last couple of weeks is at their last meeting in March, late February, the selectmen said in the wake of the Florida school shooting, they were going to ask Police Chief Tom O'Laughlin to go in and see is there anything more they can do in the school system. I mean, right now it's an awkward thing to ask a parent, but you think your kids are safe in the school system?
I mean, generally, I
Yeah.
do. I mean, but certainly, you just don't know. It's no different than driving down the road, right?
Right, but you do have police in the schools now.
Right, you do, and certainly, we have a lot of faith in the teachers that are there, that they're going to protect my students, and that the policies that they have in place. Certainly they practice different drills in circumstances that could possibly occur. And you hope that it never does, but you hope that there's preparedness from the students, from the staff, and you hope, and that the response from our police force is going to be quick and justified.
And if people don't realize that each school building, and in fact the youth center and the library as well, have police radios in the offices where if something happens, they're right, all they have to do is press the button and everybody all the police and public safety people, the fire people, they all hear it.
Right. And recently Milford did a active shooter training
I was just saying,
over
at Woodward?
vacation. So I'm not sure exactly what school they did it at. I know
they
that
did it, yeah.
they did do an active shooter training. My wife, that's also in education, has been a part of that training, from a staff member side. So not only do I worry about my kids, but I have to worry, or I do worry about my wife in another school system from a neighboring town. So, it's a concern in the back of your mind. But I think every day I drop my kids off with the utmost confidence that, at the end of the day that they're coming home.
Yeah, I think they identify, from my knowledge of things going on, they seem to identify, I don't want to call them problem people, but let's just say emotional issues early on. So that if somebody is sticking out like the person in Florida was, they already know it and are working on it.
Well, the high school's got a very good, relatively speaking, if you've ever been there during school hours to try to go into the high school, it's very, very secure. You got to go to one door, you got to check in, you got to do all the right things. So,
Well, all the buildings are that way,
yeah,
so.
I haven't been to the other buildings, but I've been to the high school several times, and it's really very, I think, secure, so nobody's going to run through the place. But having said that, having been to a active shooter training drill for one Saturday as a town official, it's a real eye-opener, really wake-up call. It put me in mind back when I was in the service.
And it certainly opens up the whole social emotional issue within
Yes.
schools.
Yeah.
And just to, starting at a very young age and just teaching our children, to how to share and how to interact with their peers and things like that. So it's
funny that before the electronics age, or what somebody calls the screenagers,
right.
before everybody was glued to a smartphone, kids did learn how to interact. I always get that from my kids who think I'm ancient, is, what did you do as a kid? I go, well, we played, before all this, and I go, we played in the dirt. We made up things. We talked to each other.
Well, that's the dilemma. The dilemma is that kids today communicate via the cell phone.
Bullying is, she wouldn't have lunch with me. That's not bullying. To me, bullying is when the kids beat you up and take your lunch money.
Well, there's certainly, but certainly now with social media out there,
Yes, it does change to what
bullying
people
has
say about you.
certainly taking on
behind
a
your
whole
back.
new avenue.
Yes.
And certainly schools need to be aware of that. So
I don't want to make light of that.
Yes, certainly.
But I will
Yeah.
say that if somebody decides, you invite them to your lunch
Yeah.
table and they have decided
Yeah.
to sit somewhere else,
Yeah.
I don't consider that bullying. The stuff that goes on social media, that's bullying. I've seen it.
Right.
It's bullying.
But you got to be careful in the school environment. Certainly,
Yeah.
there's certain kids that are certainly can be more fragile in that situation of, you're talking one individual person, but it is
Yes.
if it is a cohort of students that do go in and sit at another
Well,
table.
I'm also talking about somebody,
annihilate. Yeah.
and this happened at Stacy a couple of years ago, where a kid took his finger, went bang, bang,
Right.
and got suspended for that.
Right.
Because the person he went bang, bang to took offense to it.
Right.
Where, probably most adults would go, oh, come on. But the student that was the recipient of that gesture,
Felt threatened,
felt threatened.
and certainly in today's day and age,
That's it.
Everything is taken
Yes.
on a little bit more serious nature. So,
but rightly
it's
so,
the
given
world we live in.
but
yeah.
rightly so, given the instances that happen in schools or theaters or wherever. I'm certainly more wary of my surroundings than I ever was in the past, given things that have happened.
Well, one of the things that kids today have lost is situational awareness. I grew up, I knew what was around me, I always was aware of the action around me, and it's the same as military training. You know what's going on, and you watch for out of the norm movements or out of the norm action. And kids today are so tied up on their cell phones, they're not as situationally aware of what goes around and what's happening around them.
When all my kids were learning how to drive, they were amazed that I would teach them. You're going on a main road past an intersection and there's a car stopped at a stop sign. I would predict for them whether or not the person was going to jump in front of them, and they would go, how can you do that? I said, look at the car, look at the person. Look at the car and the person together, look at their gestures as they're sitting there. You can predict if they're going to jump right out in front of you or they're going to let you go.
Well, it's the same.
And I was right about 9 times out of 10, and they were amazed. And I said, just as you're supposed to look in your side view mirrors, in your rear view mirror, and in front of you while driving, just look around you at who's around you.
I went through, when I learned to drive, my father, we'd be driving on the freeway, and we're driving.
Now, since you make fun of me all the time about that, I'll say in the horse and buggy days
Yeah, well, it's same thing, yeah, same thing.
on the farm.
Yeah, well, I started driving when I was old enough to look over the steering wheel, but that's a whole nother story. But I was always taught to drive when you're on the freeway, you want to know what's going on as far as you can see in front of you. And a safe distance between you and the car in front of you is 1 car length for every 10 miles an hour. You get on the freeway today, I was going to the bank today, and there was a guy in a van behind me,
Riding
and he
the
had to be
bumper.
half a car length behind me.
Well, I always say if I can't see their front license plate, they're too close.
I was thinking about getting a sign to put on the back of it, but that's a whole other thing. If you can read this, you're too close.
Well, I've seen some cruder ones than that, but anyway, let's get back to school.
So are there anything personally, anything, if you look back in time and your experience with school, anything that you'd change if you could, if you had a magic wand?
No, I think, again, everything's become, it's an educational process, not only for my kids, but for me. So again, if there is a bump in the road in a situation that didn't quite work out to my liking, well, we learn from it. So if I had to change everything, now does everything just become smooth and easy and without those situations that are, in a sense, learning points for both myself as the parent and my child? And anything that I've learned in the past, now I can put forward as a good school community member to understand, like, hey, this is a situation that happened in the past, so let's fix it. So
When's the next certification for the high school?
I do not know that.
Oh, interesting. Do you know?
I think it just happened.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Or it's happening. But I have a question for you about the schools. There's been a lot of talk over the years about the number of students choicing out of the Milford school system versus the number choicing in. And it used to be a lot more choicing in, and the town actually made money then. And then in the last couple of years, it's gone the other way, so the town's been paying out. There is a marketing committee looking at working on this. Do you have feelings one way or the other? Do you need to get up to speed on the issue, or?
I mean, certainly know all about the fact that, yeah, we're on the minus side from the plus-minus ratio. So we've got more kids going out than we have kids coming in from other communities. So therefore, it's a financial burden on our town from that standpoint. So we have to look at, why are kids leaving, for any particular reason, what are those particular reasons? And certainly you have to look at, the high school being at the level 3 status as probably one of the biggest indicators alone of that. So if you have a choice of sending your kids to a level 1 school that's a neighboring school, certainly it would be, in the best interest of your student and of the parent to send their child to that level 1 school. So again, important to maintain or, again, reestablish our school as a level 1, the best that we can be, school. That way we can market our high school and our school system alone to be, the best of all the surrounding communities, in comparison to them.
And I don't know the specific factors that led it to be dropped from a level 1 to a 2 and then a 2 to a 3. I think it would be interesting to find out, are there specific criteria where the high school did not score that well on, and what do you need to bring them back up to the level they would?
Right. Yeah.
Well,
And again, that, as you know, you just don't jump overnight. You have to bring it back to a 2 and back to a 1, and it's probably going to take a few years. It's probably going to take, some resources and effort to get there.
Well, interestingly enough, if they're going through certification, or they have gone through certification, all that stuff would be in the reports. You could open it up and read every issue that was identified. So that, as a matter of public record, and a little bit different than Kevin said, is that it is possible to change almost overnight what happens, recertification. It depends on a couple things. The plan in place for improvement, and the action and the plan on when you're going to make those things happen. So those are all things that can be done under under, because we went through that in Mendon.
Oh, God, did we?
We were on probation, and in 1 year, we went from probation to a blue ribbon school. But,
Well, we also built a new school.
well, that was part of it. That was part of
Well,
it.
that was the impetus
part
for
of the
building the
formula.
new,
Well, that was a, yes.
Yeah.
then high school, middle school was,
You know,
we got
what
put
is-
on probation and the two towns said, whoa.
Right. You know, what is the ratio of dollar per student? You know, certainly is one of the factors.
Right, well, my argument has always been that, you know, more money doesn't make a better education.
100%, yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, certainly one of the major criteria that they're looking at is the MCAS scores. So, you know, if you look at MCAS scores, they're very wide in the variety of scoring.
And the argument I have with that is, there's always a bell curve.
Yes.
And there's always the people on, if you're looking at it, the people on the left, there's always people on the left. And you go up in the great middle or going up and in the middle and going down, and you always have the really, really smart kids on the right. The trick is getting more of the people on top without taking away from the smart kids on the right.
You don't want a bell curve, you want a square wave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, if you look anywhere at the way things are graded, there's always a curve. Things plot that way, whether you like it or not.
Right.
Things wind up plotting that way, and sometimes people have to realize that there are people that need help, and there are people who don't.
Well, the other dilemma you have is moving from one district to another district, for example, is a self-fulfilling prophecy and exacerbates a problem that it may exist, because what happens is that the people who say, well, gee, you know, I think I want my child to go to a different school system. Well, those are typically the ones who can afford to do that. So what happens is that you have those people who are more engaged in education and more and involved in education leave the system, and then those people who are not as engaged are still in the system, so it almost exacerbates the problem. So it's not just a simple fix to add an educational plan like AP classes or whatever. There's a lot of things that go along with it.
And you're not going to change the town demographic
No, you
overnight.
can't change that. So you have to create an environment where the educational process and plan it works well with the demographics in the town. So I mean, there's not an easy.
No, certainly it's a complicated formula.
I mean, it's a
And-
public
and
school, which means you take who the public sends you.
Exactly. Yes. You know,
And that can change
it's our
radically
job
over generations.
for every student that shows up on the doorstep of Milford School, we educate that child.
Yeah, there hasn't been, and I've made this statement a couple times. There hasn't been a change in public education paradigm of public education in 160 years.
Okay, we've got just a few
Right.
seconds left
Okay.
in the show. So I'd like to ask you this. Your last chance to talk openly to voters in Milford, why should they elect you?
So again, my name is Christopher Wilson. I am running for Milford School Committee. Been an 18-year resident of Milford, so certainly have been a part of this community for a long time. And I have two children that are within the school system and have always been a part of their education process. So certainly just want to take the next step. And you know, my desire is to be on the school committee to be more from the district-wide policy. You know, I had the ability to serve on the school councils for Brookside, for Woodland, and for Stacy Middle School. So I've worked on school improvement plans for those individual schools, and certainly just would like to continue on from a district standpoint.
Well, Chris, we
Thank
both
you.
wish you luck on April 3rd.
Thank you very
Good
much. I
luck.
appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you very much.